A company said to have only around 70 employees bought for $1.5 billion. It's an acquisition that almost anyone would look at and think, that's way too expensive. And it has just been completed. But here's how I see it. What ADI, the big analog semiconductor maker, actually bought was not the power technology itself, but rather a seat at the AI design meeting. If that reading is correct, the balance of power in the market for AI power delivery could be redrawn in a big way in the years ahead. Today, let's take our time and carefully unpack what's really going on behind this deal.
Hello everyone, I'm Ty, with 31 years in the semiconductor industry. Today, we're taking a look at a piece of news. Analog Devices has completed its acquisition of Empower Semiconductor. By the time you finish this video, you'll understand why a small company of just 70 or so people carried a price tag of $1.5 billion, and what it is that truly holds value in the semiconductor business in the age of AI. Please stick with me all the way to the end.
As always, let's begin with a familiar, down-to-earth analogy. Our stage this time is the world of building skyscrapers. When plans for a new tower are announced, public attention naturally gravitates toward the height, the design, and the famous architecture firm behind the project.
But as buildings grow taller and more massive, a rather unglamorous problem starts to become serious. That problem is water. Delivering water all the way up to the top floor at a steady and reliable pressure turns out to be surprisingly difficult. The higher the building climbs, the more the worries pile up. The flow weakens on the way up, waste increases, and the plumbing grows ever more complicated.
The old-fashioned approach was to place one big pump on the first floor and push all the water up to every floor from there in one go. But once a building becomes truly enormous, this method hits its limits. On the upper floors, the water pressure becomes unstable, and the losses along the way keep mounting. And so a new way of thinking about the design becomes necessary, distributing small pumps right next to each floor, close to where the water is actually needed.
Here's the tricky part. Plumbing and pumps cannot simply be added on after the building is finished. Where each pipe and each pump goes is essentially decided at the very first stage, when the blueprints are being drawn. In other words, a plumbing contractor who isn't invited to that first design meeting loses the entire job for that building. Conversely, once they're chosen, the work continues for as long as the construction of that building goes on.
Now, imagine there was a small plumbing design firm with only about 70 people. Despite its modest size, for some reason it was always invited, right from the very first meeting, to the new tower projects of famous developers. A major equipment manufacturer then bought this little firm at an extraordinary price. What they purchased was not the drawings or the tools, but that seat in the meeting room. From here, let me explain concretely how this simplified story plays out in the real world of industry.
The main character this time is Analog Devices, commonly known as ADI, an American semiconductor maker. It's a major company with a long track record in fields like analog semiconductors and power management. In July 2026, ADI announced that it had completed its acquisition of Empower Semiconductor, a company that works on power technology for AI. Empower, the company that was acquired, is a fabless firm estimated to have around 60 to 70 employees. Fabless means it owns no factory of its own and focuses purely on design. Because it's a private company, its revenue has not been disclosed. It's known for holding high-density, high-efficiency power delivery technology aimed at AI compute and data centers. The acquisition price, as announced at the outset, was said to be an all-cash deal worth roughly $1.5 billion. Empower's strengths lie in its silicon capacitor technology and in what's called an IVR, an integrated voltage regulator. Its silicon capacitor products are reportedly already in volume production, which shows that this technology is not merely a picture of a rice cake, in other words, not just an empty promise. Behind all this lies the serious power problem facing AI servers. The power consumption of GPUs is climbing rapidly. Today, 1 kilowatt class chips have become a reality, and the next generation is bringing several kilowatt class chips into view. The more power a chip consumes, the more heavily the challenges bear down. Voltage conversion, current delivery, heat generation, and mounting density on the board. Now we get to the heart of the matter. The typical first impression is $1.5 billion for a 70-person company is far too expensive. And honestly, that's exactly what I thought at first too. But when the news of the completed acquisition arrived, I went back and reread the press release from the original announcement in May, and my thinking changed. There, I found a single sentence that revealed the true aim of this deal. That sentence was, in essence, a statement that Empower's IVR programs were progressing in close collaboration with major hyperscalers and AI silicon providers. Hyperscalers are companies like Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and Meta, firms that operate their own giant AI data centers. AI silicon providers refers to companies like NVIDIA and AMD, or firms developing dedicated chips specifically for AI. Why does this one sentence matter so much? Because power delivery for AI is not a component you can bolt onto a finished GPU after the fact. Power delivery is tied to the entire system: the package, the board, the cooling, the countermeasures against electromagnetic noise. For that reason, you need to be part of the discussion from a very early stage, back when the chip's design is just getting underway. And once you're designed in, it's not unusual for that adoption to continue for several years across that generation. In other words, Empower was very likely already sitting in the AI design meeting. The way I see it, what ADI bought for $1.5 billion was a position within the AI ecosystem, encompassing the technology, the track record in mass production, and the relationships with major customers. The fact that Empower's CEO, Tim Phillips, has been announced as continuing to lead IVR technology at ADI after the acquisition is another sign of the intent to bring in the talent along with everything else. Incidentally, there's also the fact that Capital G, Google's growth investment arm, had invested in Empower. But that was an investment, and it does not mean that Google was a customer. I take it simply as one piece of evidence that Empower's future potential was highly regarded. So why did ADI choose to acquire rather than develop the technology in-house? The reason, as I see it, is the sheer speed of the AI market. NVIDIA rolls out a new GPU practically every year. The HBM makers keep pouring in enormous investments, and advanced packaging is rapidly moving toward practical use. There simply isn't the luxury of spending several years carefully nurturing a technology. That's precisely why ADI chose the path of buying the technology, the talent, and its standing at the design meeting, buying the time itself, all at once. Of course, this market has some formidable rivals. In analog semiconductors as a whole, there's TI, a longtime competitor. And in power delivery for AI, there are heavyweights lined up: Infineon, Monolithic Power Systems, commonly known as MPS, and Vicor as well. Even so, I believe ADI has a solid path to winning. That's because it may be able to shift the battleground away from a performance contest over individual power ICs and toward a more upstream discussion: how to design the power architecture for the entire AI system. Now let's think about the impact on Japan. The more the power circuitry of AI servers becomes the main battlefield, the more demand grows in the areas surrounding the power IC. Passive components like capacitors, the boards, the mounting, and the thermal design. These are fields where Japanese component and material makers have traditionally held real strengths. So I see the expanding investment in AI power delivery as a potential tailwind for the Japanese players. The lesson this acquisition shows us is simple. In the age of AI, it's not enough merely to make an excellent component. Being invited to that very first meeting, where the design of the next generation chip begins, that itself becomes an enormous source of value. That price tag of $1.5 billion was, quite possibly, the price of exactly that seat. Let me sum up. ADI has completed its acquisition of Empower Semiconductor, a maker of power technology for AI. Empower was said to be advancing its collaboration with major hyperscalers and AI chip makers, and I see the true value of this $1.5 billion acquisition as a seat at the AI design meeting.
Starting from power delivery, the part so often hidden in the shadow of the GPU, a new competition over AI infrastructure is taking shape, and it's one well worth continuing to watch.
That's all for today. I'll keep bringing you semiconductor news and analysis. So if you found this useful, please like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. This has been Ty on Semiconductor News Decoded.